You have blue eyes, I have blue eyes. You're 5 feet 8 inches tall, I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall. Oh, me, must have had a list as long as your nightshirt when I was 12, but I seem to have lost some curiosities over the years.
The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford just might be one of the most mistakenly overlooked films of all time. It is a poetic character study in identity and ambition, a masterclass in visual tone and atmosphere, and a modern western that defies its own genre, not playing overly heavily into any previously established tropes. It focuses less on gunslinging action and more on moral consequences, less on overused character archetypes and more on realistic and multifaceted personalities. Written and directed by Andrew Dominik, the film loosely adapts the last year of American outlaw turned American icon Jesse James's life, culminating in his subsequent execution by Robert Ford, a member of his own James gang. Though despite this, the film isn't really about Jesse at all, it simply centralizes on him. The film is really about Bob and how the events of Jesse's life have directly impacted and influenced him. The film is a subtle yet complex and artistically brilliant analysis of Bob's misguided admiration for Jesse that runs deep in the dark facets of humanity and that slowly withers into an even darker sense of disillusionment.
I can't figure it out. Do you want to be like me? Or you want to be me?
The idea of the traditional Western is perhaps one of the most easily recognizable genres throughout all of film, and quite often you'll find that for as many people that there are that love them, there is an equal amount of people that despise them. Though nowadays it's more uncommon to find a new traditional Western film, with more and more revisionist Western films seemingly making their way to the theatrical frontier. Most of these retain the primary assortment of Western iconography that so clearly defines the genre, but differs in their portrayal of such plots and characters, usually aiming to uncover a deeper truth about the world we live in. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is one such of these revisionist westerns, and has quickly found a place amongst my list of all-time favorite films. There are many reasons why I so highly regard this relatively unknown film, though I think the main reason is in how it communicates its thematic ideas so perfectly in a blend of visuals, audio, and the content of the screenplay itself. Though the film looks and feels more like a traditional Western than the likes of the same year's Best Picture winning revisionist Western, No Country for Old Men, the visual spectacle and the true story it adapts itself from serve only as a backdrop to the substance and emotional layers imbued in the characters of the film. The premise is really quite simple at its core, and only held back by some slight misfocused pacing issues in the second quarter of the film and the unwarranted use of excessive fades to black. It's not a premise we haven't seen before, though it is a premise perfectly captured through the complex characters and the intricate filmmaking, a poetic character study of sorts.
He had 2 incompletely healed bullet holes in his chest and another in his thigh. He was missing the nub of his left middle finger and was cautious lest that mutilation be seen. He also had a condition that was referred to as granulated eyelids, and it caused him to blink more than usual, as if he found creation slightly more than he could accept.
From the very first sequence of shots in the film, we are introduced to the character of Jesse James in extensive and lyrical detail. The combination of visuals and audio force us to view him almost as a mythical being, something more than just human. None of the other characters, including our protagonist, are given such an introduction. In fact, the introduction of Jesse is immediately followed and juxtaposed with the introduction of Bob, who is looked down on by the film, almost as if, as opposed to Jesse, he is something lesser of a human. We also see the way Bob idolizes Jesse's mythical nature in the same way that the film does, consistently ignoring the ever-present and ever-clearer flaws of the man as the film progresses. This opening sequence very quickly establishes the tone of the film and the basis of which these characters will fulfill the story. The primary thematic idea of the film is that of disillusionment, which is given a breeding ground in the beginning of the film to build and eventually come to fruition through Bob's character arc. Bob is, by nature, an ambitious man, seeking an identity that he deems significant.
I honestly believe I'm destined for great things, Mr. James.
But in response to his aspirations, he is met only with scorn.
You may as well quench your mind of it. Because you don't have the ingredients, son.
This pushes Bob's youthful fascination with Jesse to a new height entirely, modeling his life on him in hope of replicating his fame, and subsequently he reaches a distinctly unhealthy level of obsession. Bob fears being insignificant in the world, and so tries to align himself with Jesse in order to forge an immortal identity of sorts. There is a lingering eerie sense of Bob's dark and misguided admiration as he lurks behind every wall and watches through every foggy window. He even becomes more like Jesse in physical appearance as the film goes on, gradually losing his youthful earth-tone clothing for the simpler, clean-cut, monochromatic attire of Jesse, almost identical in appearance, right down to his hat. And when the moment comes, Bob crosses a line he will never be able to come back from, losing all sense of himself, and ultimately leading to his own downfall, where he will find fame for his name, but only for killing Jesse. Though this is where the film disguises its own intention, differing to the real story of Jesse's death, or at least to how it was perceived. Just as the film suggests, society saw Robert Ford as a coward for killing Jesse James.
Murder! Cur! Coward!
Though the film frames the actual event as a product of immense fear as much as it does an act of cowardice, most of the film aligns itself with society's outlook, evident nowhere clearer than the title itself, unmistakably creating a bias in favor of Jesse over Bob. This only acts to elevate the emotional resonance of the film as we shift to a place of sympathy for Bob. He is constantly belittled by those around him growing up and treated as a child, even inside the gang. This is captured powerfully in Casey Affleck's subtly expressive and sensitive performance, rivaling his Oscar-winning role in Manchester by the Sea and making it almost impossible to not feel sorry for this so-called coward.
Yeah, got himself a little museum in this.
Next time you come snooping around here, you better strap on a shooting iron!
Ooh, you can see how scared I am.
You too, Woodhite. You cross me again, I'll put a bullet through your head!
And this devaluating of Bob by the other characters is ultimately what leads the film to where it ends.
Someone get my feelings hurt.
I don't care!
Bob starts the movie in the same place we do, looking up at Jesse as a kind of godlike character, though as the movie progresses, Jesse slowly loses his calm and airy nature as he becomes more suspicious and hyper-vigilant of betrayal.
From now on, you two won't go anywhere without me. From now on, you'll ask for my permission. From now on, you'll ask to be excused.
He can sense his reckoning coming and fears only the worst, pushing him to act brutally in accordance with his gut instincts and let himself slip into being controlled by his fear and anger.
Where's Jim? 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 Where?
But he ultimately cannot seem to escape his past, even if most of the danger he perceives is only in his head. He becomes more and more distant and detached from the real world, seemingly stuck between deciphering what he thinks is true and what is actually true, ultimately driving him to the very edge.
You ever consider suicide?
And despite the ever clearer tumultuous state of Jesse's mind, Bob still aspires to be like him, thinking only of the fame he has and nothing of the pain that so clearly paints his soul. So when Bob shoots and kills Wood Hyde, he sees it as an act of proving his worth, as though he has performed a heroic deed and should be considered a gallant gunslinger of the West. But he never receives the admiration he thinks he deserves, seeing himself as no different than the Jesse James he idolizes. Though in reality, as we come to realize, Jesse is not the same man that Bob reveres, and when we see him kill a man at the start of the film, it isn't heroic, It is quiet, lonely, and introspective. We later see Jesse reflect on these moments.
I'll tell you one thing that's for certain. You won't mind dying once you've peeked over to the other side.
And when Jesse too starts to treat Bob with the same disrespect as the other characters,
Hey, son.
Bob slowly becomes disillusioned with the man Jesse is, but fixated on the man he thought he was. His admiration becomes resentment, and his aspirations become vengeance.
I've been a nobody all my life. I was the baby. I was the one they made promises to that they never kept. And ever since I can remember it, Jesse James has been as big as a tree.
As easy as it is for me to discuss the characters and character building of this film on a pure narrative basis, the filmmaking takes the storytelling to a whole new level. This may be one of the best looking films ever captured, but more significantly, the filmmaking perfectly embodies the film thematically. Roger Deakins' cinematography is dense in visual tone, accentuating every minor detail of the brilliant acting, Brad Pitt and Casey Affleck in particular. The film consistently makes use of more experimental techniques visually as well, capturing images that produce a vignette-like blur that mimics the passing of time, as if looking deep within a distant memory that has faded and begun to lose its meaning. Nick Cave's score underpins these visuals with a sense of omniscient and pensive melancholy, and together they create a sensory experience of the film's emotional core. We can feel the pain of the characters and understand their conflicting personas through the film's means of cinematic expression. The film exceeds merely being poetic, because the film itself is poetry. It goes beyond words and becomes everything we experience. Poetry that is seen, heard, and felt. Poetry, but not art for art's sake. The film is meticulously intentional, embodying the core idea of disillusionment in such a visually and audibly captivating way, almost as if we are here to watch fate itself unravel before our eyes. And that's exactly what we do. All of this complex character building and emotionally expressive filmmaking comes to fruition in the scene that underpins the whole film, the assassination of Jesse James. Though it plays out in a rather interesting way. We have been led to believe that Bob will kill Jesse out of cowardice, anticipating the incident from the very moment the film begins. But when we reach this point in the film, it's hard to not sympathize with both Bob and Jesse, who, as it turns out, are both more human than anyone cares to believe.
I wonder about that man that's gone so wrong.
Jesse is genuinely trying to overcome his depressions and deep-seated fear of betrayal, while Bob and Charlie are genuinely in fear for their lives. There are minor subtle cues in the filmmaking and acting that build up a sequence of immense suspense, which all leads to this moment. The film is plagued by silence and stillness, as we hear only the gentle whispers of the wind and Jesse's young daughter reciting poetry, almost as if she is drifting through the wind herself. Jesse removes his guns and lays them down, and in this moment, Jesse makes the most important decision of the whole story.
Don't that picture look dusty?
And as Jesse willingly puts himself in the presence of imminent and almost certain death, we and all the characters in the scene know what is about to happen. And though the title of the film tells one story, the apathy in Jesse's face tells another. He isn't a victim of a cowardly assassination. He is a victim of suicide. This seems like it would be a timely place to end, both the film itself and this video, though there is another 20 minutes of the film, perhaps more important and powerful than the scene of the film's namesake, because in this short time we watch the final evolution of Bob's character, 10 years of his life in a mere 20 minutes. We watch him realize and reflect on what he has done.
You know what I expected? Applause.
And we watch as he takes the look of apathy from Jesse as though it is only his depression that Bob has inherited by killing him. Bob has achieved nothing by the film's end, and all of his aspirations and plans for the future are lost to time, almost like the film itself.
He kept to his apartment all day, flipping over playing cards, looking at his destiny in every king and jack.
The film tells a story not of cowards and heroes, nor of kings and jacks, but of a genuine and irrevocable tragedy.
There would be no eulogies for Bob. No photographs of his body would be sold in sundry stores. No people would crowd the streets in the rain to see his funeral cortege.
Bob ends the film no longer disillusioned by his once aspirations to be like Jesse James, but only for the person he himself has become.
Hello, Bob.
The shotgun would ignite, and LMA would scream. But Robert Ford would only lay on the floor and look at the ceiling, the light going out of his eyes, before he could find the right words.